Welcome, friends and fellow horse fiends. You've landed on Come Ride With Me, a podcast dedicated to helping you find harmony, joy, and success in your riding. I'm your host, Anna Fox of Equestrians. This pod isn't about training your horse, but about training you to be the best partner for your horse. Listen to find out how I use my intention to direct my ride. You'll hear how I decide what to focus on, what to say yes to, and when to redirect my horse. You'll see how not getting frustrated or overwhelmed is the easiest path to sanity and harmony. So, what are you waiting for? Come ride with me. Hello, horse fiends. Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of Come Ride With Me. I am Anna Fox with Equestrians. We aren't riding this week because I've been taking a bit of a break over the holidays. I also love sharing this presentation on goal setting, so I thought, what better time of year than to do it now? Now, if you aren't listening to this at the beginning of the year, that's okay. It's never a bad time to start planning and plotting your goals. I use the basic SMART goals theory, which you can Google plenty about, but I add a little twist. Instead of making it columns, or instead of making goals for you and your horse as a team, I set two columns for the horse and the rider as an individual. And I'll get into a little bit more of my theory on this later, but I feel like this allows you to be accountable for you during the process, right? No, well, my horse doesn't, so I don't. It's can you do this or can you not? And it also allows you to notice where you need to be accountable for your horse. Because even though we want our horses to be a part of the process, our horses don't understand goals and they have no use for them. So we can't teach them to have ownership in the goals. We can teach them to have ownership in some of the tasks that we teach them, but we can't teach them to have ownership in our own personal goals. So this allows you to separate that out, kind of take the emotion out of it a little bit. I feel like some people get really emotional and really fixated on how they feel about something and how they feel about something that's going with their horse, when maybe if you just looked at it as, oh, I'm not competent in that area yet, and my horse can't be until I am, it would help the process along and not help you feel like you were lost. It's really easy to also fall into the trap of not quantifying our goals. Or we make up some really vague ones that maybe we think we'll achieve. The issue with this mindset is that we don't have anything to look forward to because we aren't specific enough about what we want. In college, I studied athletic training and worked with lots of different sports, lots of different types of athletes. And when you're in an athletic training program, it means you're dealing with athletes that have injuries. You're not just managing athletes day to day in their normal course of activity, but you're also managing any injuries they have and trying to help them recover from those, any surgeries, things like that. So we use a lot of different methods of goal setting. Everybody's an individual. And so trying to find something that would motivate that person, yet not leave them feeling let down in any way. And then interestingly, after I got out of college, I actually changed which discipline I was competing in. I had grown up competing in the hunters and then went to doing eventing and then eventually on to just dressage. But when I started eventing, I realized that I needed to start setting goals for myself and my horses again. And I was totally charting new territory for me. So after a lot of trial and error, and horsemanship development, personal development, I came up with this goal setting strategy that I like to use now. That's what I'm going to share with you. And I think it really does hold the rider accountable and allows you to measure the progress of your horses as individuals. So it's also great if you have more than one horse because you may be able to complete some of your goals, but maybe one of your horses is a little bit behind. And that way you're not feeling as a human that you have failed. It's just maybe this horse has a harder time with something than another horse. So, why is it important to measure progress as individuals rather than as a whole? And we can do both. That's totally fine. But a lot of times you've got horses and riders that are at different training levels, also different circumstances. If you have you have two horse rider pairs, and let's say they're friends, and they both have horses and they're both working towards competing at first level. Even if they're in the same barn, their circumstances are not going to be exactly the same, right? So, what we want is for each person to take into account their own circumstances and their own goals and to make them feel like they're making progress and they're not failing because maybe their friend is accomplishing things faster. I think this is key to being a successful rider. Like you and your horse may be a team, but it is your job as the rider to educate your horse on what you want them to know. And separating out your goals allows you to do that. Another thing that makes us unique in equestrian sport is that we usually have one coach. Sometimes we take lessons from multiple people, we clinic with different instructors, but generally we've got one coach. And sometimes they aren't necessarily involved in our day-to-day progress, our day-to-day activities. In every other sport, athletes have multiple coaches. Even if you think to yourself, well, riding is an individual sport, why do I need more than one coach? Take golf, for example. How many coaches does a golfer have, right? They've got a swing coach, a putting coach, a driving coach, a nutritionist, a workout coach, strength and conditioning. They've got an athletic trainer. They've got a multitude of people on their team. And as equestrians, we tend to just have one person plus us, right? I think that's a really hard way to do business. I think that as equestrians, we really sell ourselves short by doing that. We need the collaboration, we need the team, we need many sets of eyes. We need that sense of camaraderie and cooperation to get it all going. And we all know that there's a feel in the equestrian community about too much competitiveness and oh, so and so is going to take somebody's student and all of that. And I think that's antiquated and it doesn't need to exist. And for our horses and ourselves to be better athletes, we need to adopt the training philosophies of the other sports. And also, if you look at very high level riders, if you look at Olympians, particularly Olympians from other countries, you will see that they have a lot of coaches in their corner. They're not going alone. They're not putting the burden on one person. Because also imagine if you just have one coach, how many students does your current trainer have? They can only be so involved in what's going on with you because they've got so many other responsibilities. Lots of them are running barns as well. So take the responsibility on yourself to go out and search for the other parts that you need. This doesn't mean that your trainer is not the best one out there. It just means that you're giving them some help, which they will probably appreciate in the long run. Okay, so I'm off my soapbox about that. I'm sorry. But I feel like we put a lot of responsibility on ourselves as equestrians, and we put a lot of responsibility on our single coaches that we should not do, and it's not fair. Okay. So I have a slideshow that I do with this presentation. I'm going to share it with you. Hopefully, it's not too glitchy and I don't mess it up too much because I don't do a lot of these presentations online very often, but here we go. And if you're just listening to the podcast, you can check the video version out either over on Patreon or on YouTube. The links will be in the show notes so you can actually see the presentation if you want to. All right, guys, here we are. Goal setting for equestrians. What's the first thing about goal setting that we need to talk about? Personal accountability. That's the heart and soul of goal setting and making progress. So, the definition of personal accountability is when you take responsibility for your own actions and their results, both positive and negative. It also involves owning your performance without passing blame or assuming your input doesn't matter. So let's break that down a little bit. Taking accountability, responsibility for your own actions and their results, both positive and negative. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. But owning your own performance without passing blame. I hear a lot of people, most people, when they come out of the arena at a horse show, my horse was fabulous, or my horse was not good, or somebody asks, how was your horse? Nobody ever asks, how are you? How were you as the rider? Did you ride that horse like you should have ridden that horse? Did you give your horse the opportunity it needed to shine? So that's a form of passing blame. If you're saying my horse did or my horse didn't, that's a form of passing blame. Also, it is assuming that your input doesn't matter. Then that would assume that no matter how you rode your horse would do the things that it did. Is that true or is it not true? It's also assuming that your input into the training process doesn't matter. So if there's something that you feel like would help the process, but you're afraid to mention that to your trainer or your coach, or you're afraid to try that with your horse, that's assuming your input doesn't matter. And that's not good personal accountability. Whose goals are floating around in their head like this, right? All athletes have these same issues. We all have the personal accountability issues. Accountability, wow. And we all get into these cycles of maybe passing blame or assuming that our input doesn't matter. These are key things. But what we don't want is like our goals to be sort of floating around in the stratosphere like they are in this slide, right? We want them to be clear and concise and to have a direction to go in. Years ago, I was riding with Karen Rolfe at a clinic, and she asked me to explain something, maybe the shoulder in, like, how do you do this? And I went into like this long dissertation of all the things that needed to happen. Then she looked at me and she said, if you were competing at the Olympics, what would you want to be thinking of when you were going down center line? And of course, my first thought was, this is fucking amazing, right? Because that would be what I would want to be thinking. But I thought, oh, I have to say something else. Like, that's not good. And she stopped me and was like, no, your first thought is the first thought. And so all you want to be thinking about is how amazing this is. You don't want to be thinking about, can I be straight? Is my horse going to halt? Is my canter rhythmic? And, you can't think about all of those things. They all have to be part of your being at that point. They can't be things that you're thinking about. cantering down center line at the Olympics, right? So when I think about when I get into a situation where I've got a lot of random thoughts, I come back to that analogy and I go, okay, how can I be smart about this? And how can I break things down, make them specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely? And by doing that, it makes them concise. And then you don't have all these things floating around in your head. And just while you're sitting there, think about, did you actually set goals for last year? Were you specific about them? Did you write them down? Did you take any time out during the year to evaluate the progress on those goals? Or even at the end of the year, did you sit down and see how you did? And then if you did any of that, how many of you thought, oh my gosh, I'm a complete failure. I did not achieve these goals and I just suck, right? Well, goals shouldn't be a pass fail thing. They should be, I am progressing, and they should be dynamic. And this is another reason to have multiple people supporting you while you are in this process. So if we're going to have some specific goals, it's really easy to make vague goals, like we saw in the last slide. I want to lose 20 pounds. Okay. It's specific to a point. It is measurable. It's probably achievable and realistic, but when do you want to lose that 20 pounds by? By the end of the year, before the first horse show. And by being really specific, you can break down the steps you need to get to your goal, which makes it easier to measure if you're making progress and where you might have some openings for improvement if you need it. So making your goals measurable means that at the end of the term, you can say, that happened or it didn't happen. No judgment, right? When we're doing goals, we're not judging ourselves. We're just saying it either happened or it didn't happen. Making your goals achievable and realistic. Are they fair, reasonable, and possible? Are they fair to you, fair to your horse? Is it a reasonable request of you or your horse? Is it possible? Right? Do you have the capability? Does your horse have the capability? Now, just because something is not fair, reasonable, and possible today doesn't mean it's not going to be fair, reasonable, and possible somewhere down the road. So you just have to, that's why goals are dynamic. You just have to keep that in mind that they're going to be ever changing, and that is totally fine. And that's why we should log them and make notes and write them. Then we can see our progress. And I work with so many people who will tell me, I'm not making any progress, or, it's years before they finally say, oh, I think I've made some progress, because they missed all the baby steps along the way. And that just makes us feel like we aren't making progress. It makes us feel like a failure when in fact we are making really good progress. Timely goals set time limits. This helps dissolve some of the vagueness. If you have a specific problem that you're starting with, or you're starting to use a new technique, I like to set shorter term goals for that. So maybe a week, maybe I go weekly for a month, or for 3 months. I go on a weekly thing, this is especially helpful if you have horses or humans that are rehabilitating an injury, right? Because you're usually doing things in short spurts. If it's something new, then set a shorter time frame, because one, you're usually doing it in shorter spurts. You also want to be able to adjust whether this is working or not. So if you find out that I want to do this new technique on my horse 3 times a week, But the time involved to do it means you're only getting it done once or twice a week. And you go through a whole month and you're like, God, I really can only do this once a week because I just don't have the time. Or you say to yourself, I'm only getting this done once a week, so I need to adjust my time. You make the decision. That's totally on you. You get to decide. But if you break it down into smaller increments, it's easier to see where the problems are cropping up and make smaller changes along the way. Once we have completed this list and we're like getting us some goals, this is how my general template looks. And this was taken from somebody a few years ago. And you'll see that there is a column for the horse and a column for the rider. And in particular, this horse was coming back from some lameness and some injury issues. So we had some things like maintaining soundness because that was important. The horse needed to learn how to carry itself in such a way that it was biomechanically correct and maintaining its soundness. The rider needed to build her horsemanship skills. So, starting with the groundwork to help with that, she needed to gain some strength and some balance. This was a very fit person, but her confidence and balance in the saddle was not as great. So, we needed to work on those things and improve balance and proprioception. And one of the things that's interesting when you start to make your own column as a writer is you can see where, oh, maybe I need to go take a lesson on another horse. Maybe I need to go do a lunge lesson somewhere, or I need to do a Pilates class or a yoga class, or I need to do something else off of the horse that I'm currently working on to develop these skills. So I really like separating it out because there's no muddying up the waters. You can't say, oh, well, I can't do lunge lessons on this horse. Go find them on another horse. Somebody offers that. Okay. And once you've gotten to this point, have somebody else look over your goals. Somebody that you trust, somebody who's going to give you valuable feedback and isn't going to just blow you off or tell you none of that's ever going to be possible or anything like that. You want somebody that you can trust, and then start telling other people. Because as you throw these ideas out into the universe, it comes back to you, right? It's like just saying it out there in the universe allows the ball to start rolling. So tell everyone. If in 3 months you go and you look back at those and you're like, oh, I'm still not here with my balance and my proprioception. Don't judge yourself. Don't say I'm a terrible human and throw that out the window. Figure out a way to make it better. Ask somebody who you know that has amazing balance and proprioception in the saddle how they got that way and see if they can help you. Okay, reach out. Don't keep it all to yourself. When you're setting these goals and you're working on these timelines, how do you decide your short and your long-term goals in the long run? Short-term goals are based solely on your current situation and should be easier to achieve within your current circumstances. So something, let's say, from 1 day to 1 year. Middle-term goals fill in the gaps to keep progress moving towards your long-term goal. So that's going to depend on the success of your short-term goals and direction and strategy changes in your long-term goals. Your midterm could be like 6 months to 5 years, depending on how long your long-term goal is. But your long-term goal is going to drive the direction and strategy of all of your goal setting. So think for long-term goals, 3 to 10 years. If you go out, 10 years, what do I want to be doing in 10 years with my writing? You may not be riding the same horse, right? There's lots of things that can happen. Maybe you have a horse now that's older. So those things are going to adjust. It doesn't mean this is another great reason to have a rider and a horse column because it doesn't mean that you don't take care of your own personal goals. If having this mindset of, well, my horse is going to die before the 10 years is up, that's not helpful, right? You're going to have your goals and go through them. And if something happens and you need to find a new horse, you're going to find a new horse, you're going to start again. But you should still be making progress on your goals through that. And that will make making progress with your new horse even faster and will make the goal setting process even easier. So once you've done all of this, you want to evaluate how your progress is going. And this is usually the hardest part for people, okay? You want to highlight what is going well, break down the steps of what is not going well. Judgmental criticism attaches a negative emotion to something in your brain. And then your brain identifies that as a negative emotion, and we keep going in a vicious circle of, well, I couldn't do this thing, and now that is constantly attached to a negative emotion, and it's really, really hard to counteract it later. So always reread your long-term goals to make sure you're staying on track and to make sure that they are still the track you want to be on. Because sometimes as we develop as humans, our long-term goals change. So the biggest thing, focus on successes without judgment. Now, this was an example that I just came up with. I find a lot of people want to move up in dressage or even in the hunter jumper world, right? And they can't get a lead change. And then it's like, I failed. And then for the rest of eternity, any horse they ride, the lead change is like a thing. Let's say you wanted to go third level dressage. Getting the lead change was something that you had in your goal for whatever time frame, and it didn't work. Now you're going to break down the components of this lead change. Do I have these things in place for my canter? Can I make these other transitions? Can I move my horse's shoulder around? And if when you break it down to this and you go, oh no, that's not really freely forward, or no, I can't move my horse's shoulder easily. Okay, so you haven't failed at the lead change. You have not made it easy on yourself because this basic thing is lacking. So go back. Give yourself a month to work on these basics and see if you can improve them. And then your goals change again and you change your timeline again. Always remember when you're going through that process, focus on the positive. What is working? What has worked? But note what's not working and how you can improve it. So, how do you keep track of this? Well, do your basic goal sheet. And then one of the things that I like to do is a weekly schedule that I laminate and I can write on with like whiteboard markers, or you could do it on a whiteboard. And this is my laminated sheet or my sheet that I like to laminate and do for the horse and the human. If there are things that maybe the human needs to do that don't involve the horse, I could make another column there for that. But this way, they've got a schedule of what they're doing. We've got things to improve on down here. We've got some non-riding activities that we can blend in. And they really have an idea of how they're going about their weeks. Now, as you get into the flow of the goal thing and and work on this. You may not need this, you may not need to be so specific about it, but I find that it really does help people in the beginning get an idea of the time they need to put in and how they're going to manage that. Journaling is a great way as well. And I would say just get you a notebook, keep it in your tack room so that as soon as you're done writing, you can sit down and you can write down the things and put a copy of your goals up in the front and just see if you are getting where you want to go. All right, so now we've learned all of this about goal setting. What are the biggest do's for setting your goals? Do write it down. Do be specific. Do be fair. Do tell everybody and do set a timeline. Okay, guys, I hope this helps you. I love talking about this, so if I can help you in any way, just reach out to me. I do goal setting consultations. We can do them via Zoom. We can make our lives so much easier by just setting a few simple goals. Next week, we're going to be back with a riding episode, and hopefully the weather here in Virginia will cooperate with us. But have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Come Ride With Me. My goal is to demonstrate to riders that we don't have to do something every second of a ride. We don't have to do things a certain way or at a certain time. Just staying present with your horse and gathering non-judgmental information about how they are going is way more beneficial than overthinking and overworking. If you'd like to learn more about what I do at Equus Enlightened, you can find me at equisenlightened.net or on patreon.com/equisenlightened. You can also find me on social media as Equus Enlightened. I will put all the links in the show notes. And until next time, happy riding! Oh, before you go, please remember to rate, review, and share this pod so others can find it. I would love constructive criticism, but like my mom used to say, if you don't have anything really nice to say, there's no need to say it. Just ride on, my friends. Have a great week.